Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Investing in Rural America. I'd like to turn it over to Assistant Administrator for Rural Utilities Services Electric Programs, Chris McLean. Chris?
All right, thank you very much. Welcome, everybody, to our latest office hours related to both PACE and New ERA. You are on PACE to be able to create a new era of rural electrification. And I'm honored to be joined today by Claire Swarsky, my friend and colleague, the Undersecretary's Senior Advisor on Energy. Claire is going to go over some new material that we have to share with you since our last office hours on power purchase agreements. So Claire, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chris. And yes, we do want to get to your questions, but wanted to make sure that everyone is aware of this new material. And it's exciting because we haven't funded power purchase agreements before. It's clear in the statute for the 22004 New ERA program that the purchase of power is eligible. And so this lays out for everybody how we're planning to support power purchase agreements through the New ERA program. So this is, again, just for New ERA. The purchase of power is not allowable under PACE. That is for generating new power only. But the New ERA program does allow for the purchase of power to be covered under funding for the program. So a couple of key principles to think about when you're thinking about PPAs and what you might propose under the New ERA program. The kind of guiding principles are just that, it must add that PPA and that clean energy coming from that power purchase agreement must add to your 2022 clean energy baseline. So look at your 2022 baseline. Does it add clean energy from that? And then also we are really looking to support new activities, not something that's already completely done deal. And so I'll talk a little bit about the eligibility terms, and it kind of gets into that nuance on that second point. You can kind of use these eligibility terms almost as a checklist for thinking about your PPA. The first is that a power purchase agreement can be supported if it's executed after 8/16/22. That's the date of enactment of the Inflation Reduction Act. So we are allowing anything that is executed after that date to be an allowed power purchase agreement that we could support from either a new or operating asset. So maybe that asset just got underway, is now operating. The power purchase agreement was executed after 8/16. We can support that. We'll walk through some scenarios in a couple of slides. So I'll just go through this checklist for now, but then we'll walk through some scenarios. If you have a power purchase agreement that was executed before the date of enactment of the Inflation Reduction Act, 8/16/22, but the construction for that project did not start before 8/16/22, then we can consider that for support. So again, construction did not start prior to 8/16/2022. Maybe you signed it, in 2020, but nothing happened, and construction didn't start until after the enactment. That would be allowed. The power purchase agreements have to be for 100% clean energy. The applicant, also only co-ops can apply, so it has to be the applicant that applies for this support. So you as the cooperative, the GNT, or the distribution cooperative, you would apply. And you can also, it can be joint ventures between two eligible entities, between two co-ops, but everybody, the person borrowing from us must be an eligible borrower. Infrastructure costs related to power purchase agreements and the purchase of the power are eligible. So that's good for everybody, I think. And then we've got a list of ineligible things. So, power purchase agreements for assets already under construction or operational with existing PPAs, costs incurred prior to obligation, power purchase agreement exit fees, or violations of terms of contracts. We would not cover those costs. A couple of other things here, just to note, the scoring in the New ERA program is a competitive program. We will consider the purchase of power and the building and ownership of power the same in that greenhouse gas calculation. So they're considered equally. Worth noting that NEPA and BABA do not apply for power purchase agreements because we are financing the service that is being provided to you. We are not providing funding for the actual construction of an asset. So NEPA and BABA do not apply. But because of that, in a lot of ways, we are not going to allow for power purchase agreements that include provisions that use PPA payments towards the ultimate ownership or purchase of an asset, because then we would be paying through the PPA for the construction potentially of that asset. So we don't want to have this be seen as some kind of workaround for NEPA or BABA. The point is that that it has to be you just purchasing that power, the clean purchase. So the next slide, please. Financing terms. Okay, what are we talking about here? So you can apply for a power purchase agreement up to 20 years. We would use a net present value with a 3% discount rate in terms of how would we value that total power purchase agreement. You can have a power purchase agreement that goes beyond 20 years. It's just that we will only pay for 20 years. So we had to have some kind of a cutoff. 20 years seemed like kind of where the market generally is. So 20 years is the cutoff. Again, if you have a longer power purchase agreement, you can certainly pursue that. We'll just value the 20 years and we can support that. Or if you have a power purchase agreement that is less than 20 years, that's also eligible, just up to 20 years. Again, we'll value the power purchase agreement as an estimate of the price for the term of the PPA. And sometimes there's a range in a power purchase agreement. If there is, we would take the minimum amount used. You can apply for a grant of up to 25% of that PPA cost over the term of the power purchase agreement. And if you want, you can also, cover the remaining 75% through a loan request through the New ERA program as well. So that remaining 75%, you can either cover that as the applicant, or you can also request a loan under the New ERA terms, for renewables as low as 2%. Or as low as 0% if you are replacing a stranded asset with that power purchase. For project loans, your security would be derived from the pledge of the value of an underlying asset, and additional credit support may be required. If it's a system finance, security is derived from the assets under a mortgage or indenture. And then funds will be placed into a deposit account control agreement, a DACA. And then payments can be made to the co-op for the expenses related to the capacity on our energy charges under that power purchase agreement. So say you have a power purchase agreement that goes beyond September 2031, which is our final date of disbursement. That is okay because we have the funds in this deposit account control agreement, and you can continue to get paid through that. So next slide, please. So we'll just quickly run through a few scenarios. I'm sure folks will have other questions, but hopefully these scenarios will help you answer your questions in advance. So this first one is, I have an existing wind power purchase agreement that expires in 2024. Can I use New ERA funding to extend that PPA or sign a new one? So we could include that under this program if you sign a new PPA for this project and it expands the use of clean energy. So the PPA has to definitively end, and then you can expand the amount of energy that you want under that PPA. Again, it has to increase your 2022 baseline of clean energy. Again, provided that you meet other requirements and the funding notice, such as creating consumer benefits. Again, a lot of this is really about how can we make sure that your members are seeing lower costs through these programs. So yes, if you're expanding the energy there and the power purchase agreement it definitively ends and you sign a new one. What if you signed a PPA in 2019, for example, for a solar plus battery project, but construction has not commenced? And maybe in the interim, all sorts of things have happened. But the answer is yes, construction hasn't commenced. So you can apply for the value of that PPA under the New ERA program. What about if I want to partner with a developer through a joint venture, whereby they will develop a wind plant, and the co-op will be the sole off-taker of that plant? the answer is no, the JV itself is not a co-op, so the JV is not eligible to borrow under the new ERA program. So again, the co-op has to be the applicant here. They would apply for the funds and get the funds and then pay the developer through those funds. What about if I want to purchase wind energy from an existing wind asset? I do not have a current PPA with that wind asset with the developers. The asset is already operational and I would just like to purchase power from it. Yes, this is eligible. You don't have an existing power purchase agreement. It would add to your 22 baseline. And it doesn't matter that it's up and operational. This is a new PPA for you, and adding to your purchase of clean energy. But note that the agreement would need to be executed after the date of the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act. And then the final here is I just want to purchase new wind energy via PPA from an asset that is expected to be completed in 2023. I will be the sole off-taker, but I will not own any of the project. I will just be purchasing the power. Again, yes, it doesn't matter when the asset is completed if you are just purchasing power, as long as it's a new PPA executed after August 16, 2022. So you can kind of go back to that checklist almost in terms of the slide, the slide before the last, and just make sure that the power purchase agreement that you're looking to ask for support for meets all of those eligibility requirements and none of the things that are not eligible, and you should be good. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Chris to talk a little bit about how we're planning to handle stranded assets and what that looks like. So Chris,
right.
back
Thank
over
you very
to
much,
you.
Claire. I will go over our stranded asset calculation. On one hand, it's kind of simple. Here I just have these dollar amounts are purely illustrative. So we're looking at $1 billion of stranded assets. I hope folks don't have $1 billion of stranded assets, but that was just our base case to be able to illustrate how this calculation works. And this calculator is also available to potential applicants if they want to be able to run this calculation using the same system here. So you start out, what is the stranded asset? What's the value of the stranded assets? Stranded assets, of course, have to be not just any stranded assets, they have to be stranded assets that are related to your decarbonization effort. So let's say you were to retire a fossil asset prematurely and you have useful life on that asset and, importantly, debt related to that asset. So let's say that would be the value of your stranded asset. We need to be able to have a amount that we are seeking to refinancing. In this example, we said there's 15 years of remaining life on that asset and debt associated with that stranded asset. In my example base case here, we're using just a 5% interest rate, but you would insert into this calculator whatever interest rate that you are paying on that particular debt related to that stranded asset for that term. Much the way in the PPA illustration is we do apply a net present value to be able to come up with the refinancing amount. So we're applying, in both cases, a discount rate of 3%. And then again, in the calculator, you would put whatever your loan payments terms are for your particular loan related to those stranded assets. In this example, I used the monthly payment. You could click that over to quarterly or annually, whatever it is. Figure out the loan payments per period, basically calculate what the string of payments are for that stranded asset and the debt related to it, and add it all up. Apply the net present value using the 3% discount rate to come up with, in this case, the 9.1 or 913,644,607,000. And and then compare that to the same net present value calculation using a 3% discount rate for what your new loan would be and your new interest rate would be. So in this example, we put in, a 30-year new loan at a 0% interest rate. Remember, the stranded asset refinancing rate can be as low as 0%. So we thought we'd swing for the fences on this one and show what a 0%. So you would compare your net present value stream of payments under the stranded asset debt, and then your net present value under the new debt, and subtract one from the other. That will give you the difference between the two. Add $1, and that will give you the amount that you would be required to invest in new clean energy technologies under the New ERA program in order to qualify for stranded asset refinancing. So we're not just refinancing the stranded asset. There is a trade-off here. You refinance your stranded asset, but you have to reinvest your savings resulting from that refinancing into a new clean energy resource. But wait, there's more. Not only do you get the stranded asset refinancing, you would qualify for that new investment for up to the 25% grant component for the new clean energy investment. Again, the NOFO says up to 25%. Here we're just giving you a full 25% example. So in this case, you would be required to invest $501,657,848 into new clean energy investments. But once you completed that, and those investments would have to be completed by no later than the end of the fiscal year 2031, you could be eligible for up to 25% grant for that. And then we would also be willing to provide financing up for the remaining 75% of the clean energy investment. And again, either at 0% or 2% or treasury rate, whichever category you happen to fit in. So this is just a sample, but it does walk through the methodology. In short, it's comparing the net present value of the stream of payments for the stranded debt to your new net present value of your new interest rate refinancing, comparing the cost savings, and then adding $1 to that cost savings to determine your minimum amount of clean energy investment. And if you do make that investment within the required time frame for the eligible investment categories, you could be eligible for up to 25% grant and 75% financing. So that is the stranded asset calculation. Go to the next slide. So here's another little new piece of information we have on our website. We have placed on the website a graphic illustration here. This is one of the three that we've illustrated, but to show you how the joint application model would work. This is applicable to PACE as well as New ERA, because in both cases, we have allowed applicants to create a coalition, to partner up, to be able to submit a single LOI, provided you don't exceed the maximum amount that is allowed in both programs. So what you have here is an illustration of how LOI model with disaggregation. In other words, you could have, here's a nice simple example. We've got 4 projects that are from 4 separate eligible entities combined in a single LOI. And again, this could be PACE or New ERA. So that single LOI in the case of PACE will secure for all 4 coalition members a place in the queue, and then in New ERA, the combined greenhouse gas reductions would also allow the coalition to be able to generate a greenhouse gas score. It also provides applicants, particularly those that are under-resourced, to be able to pool their resources, work together, and be able to share the costs of the LOI and application process. So in this disaggregation model, a single LOI would spawn 4 separate and distinct invitations to apply from the agency, assuming they are in the money after the LOI stage. And then each of the 3 would now be responsible for their own application. Now, you'll note that one of the 4 is highlighted in red. So in order to have a joint LOI, you do need a lead applicant. So the lead applicant would be the one that will be your point of contact for the LOI purposes. The lead applicant will retain their identification when we go through the disaggregation. The 3 other partners in this example would be given their own application identification and then proceed through the process of full applications. Each full application will be evaluated, and then each of the coalition applicants will sign their own own individual agreements, committing each one of them to their own financial and contractual commitments related to the relevant program that they're applying for. So this is how the disaggregation model would apply. A very similar type of model would be if instead of having 4 distinct identifiable projects at 4 separate applicants, if you had one project that each of the applicants would own, in this example, let's say 25% the value of each one, it would work through the same way, just you'd have a single asset. Each one of the applicants would then be responsible for 25% of that asset's investment, and we would disaggregate it similarly. If we were to have a LOI that has joint and several liability, the graphic would be very similar to a single LOI applicant, where you would just have one application, each one of these 4 steps that would go through the process. And at the end, in the joint and several liability, you would have one document that in this case, all 4 of the applicants would sign and be jointly and severally liable for the performance and obligations of the agreement with the agency. A single LOI applicant is just very simple. It's just one document, one evaluation going through the process. So that is the joint application models, and those graphics are available on our website for any further discussions, and we'll be having future outreach efforts where you'll probably be seeing this graphic in the future. Go to the next slide. And with this, I'm going to turn the podium over to Tasha Deerdorf, who is one of those extraordinary folks that have been working behind the scenes to be able to make all of this possible. She's now in the RUS electric program, but had been in the administrator's suite, being the project manager for much of our work. And Tasha is going to give a quick explanation of our just published Federal Register notice that extended the time for submissions and added additional details to the application process for PACE. Tasha?
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to cover one slide here really quick, and then we'll actually head into questions and answers, which I see we actually have quite a few open questions out there. So as Chris indicated, on July 5th, RUS issued an amendment to the PACE NOFO. One of the main reasons for the amendment was to extend the opening date to July 10th. So this was actually to provide applicants additional time to prepare for submitting their letters of interest. The other big reason was the transition to the submission of letters of interest on grants.gov. So as you get started preparing for a submission in grants.gov next week, there are a couple things that you can actually do today to actually get started with preparing. So the first thing is, if you have not registered in sam.gov, I would encourage you to start that as soon as possible. Grants.gov uses sam.gov to establish organizational authority for its users and to actually provide unique entity identification numbers. The second thing that you can do, so after you actually obtain that UIE from sam.gov, please take the time to go into grants.gov and register. And grants.gov has great helpful tools available out there that will walk you through the registration process and address any questions that you possibly have. And then third, just this morning, we issued an updated example letter of interest out on the PACE website. And we'll actually put a link to that document in the chat for everyone to get access to it. So I would encourage you to take a look at that document and start getting your letter of interest narrative all together. You will ultimately need to submit that narrative as a PDF on grants.gov. And then the fourth thing, one of the specific items you will know outlined in the example document is the requirement to use a RUS geospatial mapping tool for the submission of a shapefile. So I just wanted to note that the tool is available and ready to use right now. And we will provide a link to that in the chat. And so I would encourage you to go ahead and get started creating and saving your shapefile today. And then I've seen quite a few comments or questions really about the guide. So the NOFO did reference a guide would be coming out. We are in the process of finalizing the guide and hope to have it out on the website soon. So I think that covers it, Chris. I will turn it back over to you and Claire for Q&A.
All right, very, very good. Before we get to Q&A, I want to just share some of our favorite QR codes and contact lists for anybody who haven't done so far. Again, that sam.gov registration as well as grants.gov registration is strongly advised so that you can get a jump start on what is going to be required when the curtain comes up on Monday. And then we also have key points of contact. The next slide. I think that brings us to wide open forum. We have a lot of questions in the question box. And
You want me to
why don't we
start reading, Chris?
Yeah.
Okay, great. And Tasha, you probably have the answer to this, but Dan Stevenson asked for PACE in regard to the SF 424 that needs to be included with the submission. Will we need to provide 424C and D as well, or solely SF 424 at the LOI stage?
Yeah, it's going to be solely just the SF 424. And then the big area that folks want to be aware of is section 15 of the SF 424, where you can actually include attachments. And so that's where your LOI narrative is going to be attached, the PDF that you're going to do for that, and also your shape files that you're going to want to upload them in that same section.
Thanks, Tasha.
Right, very good.
And then Ellen Friedman has asked what approval, if any, would be required for the assignment of an LOI that has been asked to advance to the PACE loan program. What approval will be required for the assignment of an LOI that has been asked to advance to the loan program, and how much detail is required to describe the 25% equity commitment in the LOI. And then finally, does RUS look to determine if a VPPA is rural? So,
boy, there's a lot in that question that I'm not quite sure how we can answer on the fly. So I'm going to say, Ellen, what is required for the assignment of an LOI?
Yeah, it's a little bit unclear what you mean by assignment, but I think that, you just need to fill out for the LOI, you need to fill out what's in that PACE LOI application. Provide as much detail as you can about the 25% equity commitment and where that's coming from in the LOI. And then we will let you know if you get advanced to the application stage. So I'm not sure what you mean by approval, but the team will be reviewing those on a rolling basis, and we'll be able to let you know if you need to be putting together a full application.
And just to be clear, the LOI should come from the applicant or the authorized agent of the applicant. So I hope this question about assignment of LOIs is that someone doesn't want to apply for an LOI and then try to assign it to another entity. We have to know who is ultimately applying, because the LOI is just the first step in the process. And then we would move, consider, as Claire said, on a rolling basis, look at the completeness of the letter of interest. We will look, then each step of the way, we dig deeper into what is in the LOI. And if looks like we have a project that is eligible, feasible, securable, executable within the time frame allotted by the program, we will invite that applicant to be able to submit a full application.
Mm-hmm. So, then Ellen, on your last question for 3, we do need to know that the energy being produced is going to be serving at least 50% rural, and that is defined in the funding announcement. So maybe somebody from the team can paste from the funding announcement the rural definition in there. And we do have to make sure that whatever you're proposing does meet that rural definition.
Very good. Let's go to Dan's question. Will project technical descriptions be uploaded as attached PDFs, or will information be entered manually as a form? The answer, Dan, is going to be PDFs.
Yep. So you'll fill out everything that's in that PACE application. There was the sample LOI that was online. Now it's a final LOI that's on the PACE website. You'll fill out all the information that's in that document and make sure you've got everything that's in that document, and then you'll upload it as a PDF.
All right, Jamie's got a good question here, which maybe is appropriate for the Department of Treasury, but Jamie's wondering, we are looking at applying for PACE at the 40% loan forgiveness level, but are wondering if this would impact benefits from direct pay tax credits. So we welcome the addition of direct pay tax credits to our applicants. We are lenders, and anything that adds to the financial feasibility of the underlying loan is a good thing for us. We can't speak for the Department of Treasury, but we believe that there is no conflict, as we see it from the RUS point of view, between applying for PACE and applying for direct pay tax.
Yep. And so, the answer with these is always ask your tax advisor, but we have been coordinating closely with Treasury, and our understanding is that applying for PACE would not negatively impact your direct pay tax credits is our understanding. And Treasury did join the awesome webinar that we did on the 27th of June and made that point as well.
Very good. All right. We have another good question, and maybe I will recruit Mr. Solano. So see if we can sort this one out. Again, as we've said in previous webinars, when we give these answers on the fly, there's going to be some risk that the questioner may have a different context to which the answer is. And so we do encourage you to utilize the FAQ process, which do get a careful vetting. So we just want to make sure that sometimes a questioner will ask something and we will answer maybe a slightly different question, not knowing the full context. But so we have a good question here from Jake that says, for determining eligibility for the 40% loan forgiveness level, we are looking for more information about the beneficiaries. Our experience with RUS loans is that the Rural Electric Cooperative Service Territory is just one element that is reviewed, and there is typically a spatial component. given that the vast majority of the benefits will likely go to communities within, say, 5 miles, if we can demonstrate that more than 50% of the benefits will accrue to a nearby distressed community, despite the project being connected to a larger service territory, can USDA consider the 40% loan forgiveness? So Ken, I don't know if you want to take a stab at that. I mean, there are various ways to establish beneficiaries. It's just where the power goes, where the power contractually goes. You know, you can have entities purchase power for specific communities. That's one way. Ken, do you have any thoughts on this point?
Ken should feel free to jump in, but I would also note that please look carefully at the PACE program. You know, there are a lot of different RUS programs. For the PACE program, the funding announcement is clear that for the 40%, you have to be serving at least 50% of a distressed community or energy community. So I just pasted that in the chat, but you have to be, you know, if 50% or more of the population served by the proposed service area is located within an energy community or distressed or disadvantaged community. So that's what you should be aiming to demonstrate. But Ken, anything to add there?
There's just a first hurdle you have to meet is meeting the rural determination ratio of 50% or more. Once you meet that, then the loan forgiveness is determined based upon the type of population you have. So first of all, you have to meet the rurality requirements of 50% or more. And then we look at whether you have a distress or energy community or disadvantaged community, and then that's determines the level of forgiveness. It wouldn't matter if you did not meet the rural determination, then you wouldn't be eligible for any loans at that point.
Right. Please confirm the USDA PACE LOI may be signed via DocuSign. I think the answer to that is yes. I do know that a digital signature should be acceptable. I don't know if Tasha, do you have a view on Roshio's question here?
Yeah, a digital signature should be provided on the PDF that is attached to the SF424.
All right, Claire, here's a tough one. Is a solar energy project, this is from Douglas, is a solar energy project that is not grid connected and dedicated EV battery charging and energy storage eligible for loans under PACE?
So I think
we'd like a little more detail maybe on this.
Yeah, I'd like a little more detail, but I think the main question is that power for resale? Are you generating power and then selling that power? That is a requirement under the statute for this program. So you have to be reselling that power. So that would be the main thing that you would probably want to think about in this scenario. If you're not reselling that power and you're just using it for your own generation, and you are a rural business, then you should check out the REAP program, which can definitely support you in a solar plus battery project if you are a rural business. So check out the REAP program if you are not planning to resell that power.
Excellent.
Michael, you want me to read this one for you?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead? Yep.
Okay, Chris. Michael asks, in a disaggregated PACE LOI, does the 100 million loan limit apply to each project or to the single submitter? In other words, is it acceptable for each project's loan request to be under 100 million? I think it's written a little bit funny, but the total loan request disaggregated. Anyway, you know what we're doing that here.
Exactly. And so it's a very good question, Michael. The answer to that question is a single LOI. You can have $100 million maximum debt forgiveness inclusive. So
a single LOI application.
Whether you're in a joint LOI or a single LOI, and if you're in, you get one shot at this deal. So if you're in a joint LOI, you also can't have a single LOI. That you've got to kind of pick your strategy. But the $100 million cap is per LOI inclusive of your debt forgiveness.
Yeah, so if you have multiple projects that are over $100 million, then you might want to consider applying separately.
John asks, will Davis-Bacon apply with new era PPA financing? We are just financing the purchase of power. So I don't know that there is, that's a good question, Claire. I maybe we want to take that one back.
Yeah, we'll take that one back.
For
I feel like I
further
had a clear answer, yes, but anyway, your hesitation makes me question that. So we'll come back to you on that, John. Hopefully by the end of the call.
The general rule is Davis-Bacon applies, but Davis-Bacon applies to where you have labor. And so if you're purchasing a service, I think that's kind of the essence of your question. We will take that one back, and I think that's be on the lookout for a.
Yeah, and John, you said John didn't say PPA, but he said does it apply to new era financing generally? So in general, it does apply to new era financing.
Yes. If
we're just talking about a power purchase agreement, it may not apply. So I think, Buy America and NEPA don't apply. I don't think that it's likely not to apply either, but we will make sure and loop back with you. Stephanie asks, when it says obligation of RUS, does this mean when the entity receives the loan interest loan from RUS?
Okay, so this is, I think, again, Stephanie, correct us if I'm wrong, and this is another one of those cases where we want to make sure that we understand the context. I think you're talking about stranded investment. So in calculating the amount of stranded investment that is available is like the question is, well, when do you start? And so the starting point would be the point where RUS obligates funds towards the project. So that would be the obligation of RUS that's the moment when we have a meeting of the minds, we have an execution of a loan agreement, but before we actually execute the loan documents, but we then go into our computer system here and I'll say this amount of money is set aside for this purpose, and that would be the point of where the obligation of RUS would be, is when we obligate the federal funds under PACE for the stranded investment refinancing, and then going forward to whatever is remaining on the life of that financing. That being said, we know that you're not going to know that exact date, but we will know what that exact date is when we actually get there. So you're going to have to maybe have a little guesstimate of what that date would be.
And then, Chris, the second part of the question is the stranded asset value, the regulatory asset recorded on the books, or is it the outstanding debt still associated with the stranded asset?
Right. There needs to be outstanding debt associated with that stranded asset. Exactly correct. So if you have a regulatory asset, but no debt associated with that asset, then there isn't stranded debt.
Mm-hmm. And then Stephanie also said some of the debt on our stranded asset has balloon payments. Should we do a separate calculation for this debt and then add that together with the other debt that is paid quarterly?
I think we would still have to get to the same MPV. I'm going to have to put our mathematical and financial brains to work on this one, but I think the principle is the same. We would take that into account. I think the balloon payments, I have to put the thinking cap on to see whether the balloon payments influence the calculation. But the idea is that we want to sum up all of your payments that are related to the debt, to the stranded asset, and then do a net present value of that payment stream. And so if it's an uneven set of payments, that may get a little more complicated. So we might have to adjust the payment there. Adjust the calculation to accommodate the balloon payment. But that's a good question, Stephanie. If you have something that is outside of kind of the normal, let us know, and we would certainly talk to you about it when it comes time to negotiate the final agreement.
Mm-hmm. And then Ellen asks, curious whether RUS has any consent right if the change in control occurs between the time that the applicant of the LOI is asked to submit an application and the execution of the loan documents with RUS. So I think you're asking if you sell the project or their different ownership takes over, what happens? Yeah,
it's going to be very fact and circumstance driven. We do not want to encourage speculation or people trying to sell their LOIs. We do understand that life is complicated, circumstances change. There are transactions that occur that have nothing to do with this program, but we certainly don't want anyone to engage in an LOI process as a speculative measure. So if the core to the answer, though, is RUS has to approve to any change of ownership or change of material circumstance throughout this whole process. So if there is a material change that undermines the purpose of the program or poses a different risk profile, and it's a new entity that we're dealing with at the end of the process, or even dealing with once the loan is raised, the agency does have the right to either say no or to withhold its approval for transfers of assets. Mm-hmm. All right, it looks like we've got another good. George has got a whole bunch of questions here.
They're all good ones. Let's do them.
Yes. Okay. I'll read this first one. Regarding eligibility in the case of a generation and transmission cooperative, such as Basin Electric, whose member cooperatives serve rural and non-rural areas, would an offtake agreement, PPA, with such an entity qualify? Would the PPA need to identify a specific rural population in its service area for the project to be eligible under PACE? Okay, boy. Now, when I started this question, I was thinking we're talking about New Era, and then we ended up at PACE. So let's start with the PACE fundamentals. And that might lead us to the appropriate answer. For PACE, the relevance of the PPA is who is buying the power, who is the off-taker. So you don't get to finance your PPA under PACE. Under PACE, you are financing the construction of new renewable energy systems, plus under the IRA, storage that could be related to that new system, or storage that is standalone that would support an existing renewable or clean energy resource. So under PACE, we would not finance a power purchase agreement, unlike New Era, where we would, because the statute said that we could use our financial resources to finance the purchase of power. So when we would analyze, so if we assume this in the context of construction under PACE, and we would look at, is there eligible population? If a rural electric cooperative is otherwise generally eligible to be treated as rural, that off-taker as the rural electric cooperative would likely be adequately rural to meet the definition of PACE, because and I'll invite Mr. Solano or one of his colleagues who really works on analyzing rural determinations. If I think in your specific example, we would look at Basin Electric and say, that's probably an adequately rural off-taker, assuming they're off-taking it for their customers.
Right. If I understand correctly, what's important is who the off-taker is, and that service territory has to be rural. It's really as simple as that. And where the power is going, who's consuming the power,
Yeah.
what service area. That's
right.
Whether it be through a PPA or through the entity itself that's absorbing or buying or gonna be the recipient of that power, they have to meet that rural determination requirements.
Good. And why don't you stay online here, Ken, because we have George poses some other very interesting questions here is, how will service area be defined in order to establish eligibility for a project? Please elaborate on the following scenarios. So the first one, A, by location of the generating asset, interconnection balancing authority or RTO, irrespective of the offtake of the energy, the electricity is sunk locally, but a corporation may clear the financial transaction for the energy at a remote hub. Now, before you answer that one, can I just, again, this is another one of those very careful answers. We have to make sure that we have a full understanding of the context, but I do want to lay down one overriding rule that PACE and New ERA, for that matter, the agency will not entertain merchant power, where we're going to build a renewable system and we're just going to sell power to the grid. We're just going to pour it onto the grid and see what happens. That is not eligible under either. Ken, do you want to take a stab on the by location of generating asset?
I'm trying to find the question, if you could repeat.
Yeah,
it.
maybe I'll just jump in here. I think that
couldn't find the question.
the service area is really about, where is the power going? So you do have to be able to identify in the PACE program where the power is going. Like Chris said, we're not just supporting merchant power. We have to show that there's a 50%. The location of the generating asset doesn't really matter.
That's right.
So,
and that's the importance of the PPA. Again, that's the first part of the question. The PPA serves two fundamental purposes in PACE and also in New ERA and our core program. One, a PPA gives us a bankable agreement that we can make a underwriting decision that this project is financially feasible. But the PPA also establishes by the agreement who is the beneficiary of the power so that we can make a eligibility determination. So it is possible, for example, to have a renewable asset, any generating asset located in a rural area, but selling power via PPA to, let's say, Chicago, Illinois. Well, that probably would not be eligible because Chicago is clearly not a rural area. But conversely, if you had a generating asset in Chicago, Illinois, selling power to folks downstate in McLeansboro, Illinois, just to pick a random named town, which is a lovely town in Southern Illinois, that would be eligible because it's not the location of the asset as much as important as the beneficiary of that asset. So we would look to, what does the PPA tell us? Who is benefiting from this power? The generating asset is outside of a qualified area, but with an offtake agreement that serves qualified area. So that is why we have the PPA or a comparable agreement that we can look to be able to identify who is benefiting. And then C, a qualified area is covered by a cooperative's territory that may be difficult to determine, such as the cooperative stack. The top of the stack owns the generating assets. Okay, I'm not sure how to answer C because I'm not exactly sure what we mean by the cooperative stack, but
I think you're talking about where in the stack the power gets just, the power is sent out. So I think that, again, just a couple of principles to think about. Under PACE, you're thinking about the generating asset can be anywhere. The level of forgiveness is dependent on, one, you have to make sure that you're serving wherever that energy is going, at least 50% of it is rural. And then two, the level of forgiveness is dependent on what are the other characteristics of that service area. And so just think about it in those terms. And you would have to, eligibility is very broad under PACE. Again, so there's a lot, you can be an eligible entity under PACE as long as you're selling that power to at least 50% rural, and then your level of forgiveness is dependent on that amount. Again, it's for construction of projects. Under New Era, you could have only cooperatives are eligible. You could have a cooperative have an agreement with a private entity for a power purchase agreement. And then everything under that, you don't have to worry so much about service areas and things like that under New Era, because as long as the cooperative is the applicant, they are serving their members, that qualifies.
right, very good.
Yep.
So Matt's asked us to go over the process to submit the LOI for PACE. So one, you create your LOI. As Tasha advised, take a look at the template. We've had the templates out there. We've had a little bit of a most current one, and really the LOI portion is just you'll go into grants.gov. You'll get all your registration in. You'll pick out the code of the code that's associated with PACE, and then the LOI will be among your uploaded documents. The other documents that were mentioned were the PDF of your shapefile, maybe the PDFs of your supporting documents, the PDFs of your financial documents that are required by the LOI. So the method of submission after you create your LOI and reduce it to a PDF is to upload it using grants.gov.
And then Karen has a specific question about PACE and PREPA. Karen, we've been working closely with the rural development team in Puerto Rico, led by Max, who put on that program. And he and his team asked the same question. So we will answer that via email and make sure that they know that you've asked that as well, and make sure the information gets back to you.
Excellent. Carlos asks, the New Era NOFO states that loans scores at the subsidy rate related to the difference between interest rates offered on the loan and the prevailing treasury rates. Can you provide guidance on how to calculate the loan impact on the max amount available to the entity, for example, $970 million? Will a sample calculation be provided for this? Okay, so let me, our subsidy rates are, this is a great topic for a budget wonk like me. So hope I don't lose our audience in this discussion. Congress appropriates budget authority to the agency to invest, in this case, in loans and grants and loan modifications under New Era, and loans and partial loan forgiveness in PACE. So in PACE, we've got $1 billion of budget authority, and in New Era, we got $9.7 billion of budget authority. So in New Era, the grant component, the 25% of the project cost that could be eligible for grant, if you were to max out on that, that would count dollar for dollar against that budget authority. Then the 75% of your project that has to be either self-financed or financed with our funding or financed with third-party funding would then, if you use our funding, if you're eligible for 0% interest rate, I believe our current calculation today would be for a fiscal year 24 estimate. We're estimating a 42.23% subsidy rate for 0%, and then I believe it's 19.30% subsidy rate for for the 2% or treasury rates of interest financing. Combine those two together, as long as that is less than the $970 million, which is the statutory cap. Nobody can consume more than $970 million of budget authority under New ERA pursuant to the statute. So as long as you're under that number, you're golden. Someone has once asked me, what is the theoretical maximum grant amount somebody could get? I mean, somebody could ask us theoretically for the full $970 million of grant, but that means they would have to invest 3 times as much and finance 3 times as much in either their own funds, third-party financing, or RUS financing. If you used RUS IRA funding, you would have to apply the subsidy rate. If you were to use RUS core program funding, assuming it would otherwise be eligible, treasury rate of interest loans or treasury plus an eighth interest loans carry a negative subsidy rate. So if you wanted to theoretically max out your grant amount, come in for 100%, $970 million of loan, and then 3 times as much of funding for RUS. That would be a very big project. You'd have to have a lot of financial viability to be able to handle that much debt and grant, but that is the theoretical maximum. All right, enough budget talk. What do you want to do next, Claire? Oops, you're on mute, Claire.
Thanks. Eric just asked what time the PACE LOI submission portal will be opened. Our 11:59 a.m. on Monday.
A.m. That's so 12
noon.
1 minute before noon. So I've had some folks ask me about, man, 1 minute before midnight. No, it's 1 minute before noon. 11:59 a.m. God willing, PACE will go live for receiving applications in the grants.gov.
Mm-hmm. And again, there's another, Gina asked a question about, is there a webinar to submit a PACE LOI that I can watch before Monday? And the answer is no, we're having this webinar, and then online there will be a application guide. But the 2 things that you can basically, 3 things you could basically go do now are, go register on grants.gov. So you're all set on that front, number 1. Number 2, hopefully you have your sam.gov. So that's a given. Hopefully you've got your sam.gov already. But 1, go to grants.gov and set up your profile and everything. 2, the PACE LOI application is online. It was the sample LOI before, now it's the final. So you can go online, pull that, fill out that information, put it in a PDF. And then the third thing is really the mapping, and the mapping tool is on the PACE website right now. You can go now and create your shapefile for the service area that you are going to be supporting through your PACE project or projects. So those are the 3 things that you should go ahead and do.
Right, you have to save it yourself and create your own PDF so that you have something to upload. And the grants.gov also has, we encourage everybody to be familiar with the grants.gov instructions, and they do have some tips on how to use grants.gov, which I think is another thing that you can do in advance of Monday's curtain raising.
And then for John, Tasha, this might be a question for you or the other folks more familiar with grants.gov than I personally am, but for Form 424, what is required for the PACE LOI for the case of a PPA? What are you looking for? Start date and end date, expected operation dates, loan term. Are you, I guess maybe those are 2 separate questions. For Form 424, which is now required? I don't know if I totally understand the question. Would you be asking for putting PPA terms onto the 424?
Yeah. I can kind of answer that, Claire. I think the 424 is separate from what the information you would provide under the LOI for PACE, for example. You would just provide us with information regarding the status of your PPAs. Under the application, we would expect to see the actual PPAs, whether they be in draft form or executed form. So
Exactly.
the 424 just allows you, you fill out the information and then think if
That's your
Fatima don't
basic.
mind, she can explain that a little better.
Right. The 424 is your basic information about who you are, what
That's-
your points of contact are. And Ken, you make a very, very good point here. We want to inspire action. We want you to do things that you don't have in the bank. So we know you're not going to have your PPAs fully executed at the LOI stage. We do need to know that you have a reasonable expectation that you can get a PPA and that there are terms related to that PPA. Can't be purely speculative, of course,
Right.
but we don't expect at the LOI stage for you to have your PPAs all wrapped up and completed, because you may not build the project if you don't get the incentive. So we understand that. Again, the flip side is we don't want people just coming in and saying, yeah, I'm going to build this thing and I know I'm going to get a PPA with somebody. Well, no, that's not good enough. We have to be able to know specifically who you anticipate to get a PPA with. And then as you move from step to step, from LOI stage to the invitation to apply, to the submission of the application, to the review of the application, to the negotiation of terms, as we move down that time scale, we do expect that what you propose in the LOI does become firm and real before we get to the final approval stage.
Okay, great. Ellen asked how much detail is required to describe the 25% equity commitment in the LOI.
Yeah, I think that's a similar kind of situation. It has to be sufficient detail and sufficient certainty that we can make a preliminary financial feasibility judgment, that this is real, that you do have access to that equity, not that you think you might be able to get access to the equity if you get the funding for this project, right? We want to make sure that folks who advance from the LOI stage are ready, willing, able, and capable of being able to not only prepare the full application, but be able to pull off this construction of the project and delivery of the project in the time frame we have allotted, which is no later than the end of fiscal year 2031, which is September 30th. And as we say frequently in the NOFO, as well as the soon to be published application guide, your validation date will certainly be before the last date of the fiscal year 2031. We have to make sure these projects can get up and running. So if it's purely speculative, or I think I can get 25%, well, that may not cross the finish line, but we do not need a full signed in ink and signed, sealed, and delivered commitment. We just need to know that you can get the 25% and that it is a real proposal.
Right. And then Gina asked about webinar. We already answered that, but again, 3 things. Go get familiar with grants.gov, create your profile, to map out your service areas. Everybody needs to use that mapping tool on the WebPace webpage. So go draw your service areas using that mapping tool and save those as shape files. And then 3, the final LOI is online. So just make sure you've got all of that information in a document, and then that it gets signed and that you turn it into a PDF, and you should be good to go.
Okay. Carlos asks, could proposed project information be made public before award through a FOIA request? All right. Well, I mean, FOIA does apply. I will just say that when I was in private practice, I would advise my clients who applied to the agency to clearly delineate what they believe to be proprietary, confidential information. So, court orders, congressional subpoenas, there is no protection against that. that applies to everybody. But the FOIA as well as FOIA exemptions would apply. So if you do have sensitive information, please be sure to note that in your LOI. I think your LOI, when there are awards to be announced, that is a public action, because once we start obligating funds to a project, that does become a public act. And then we also, again, if you do have issues, there are some tools that we have available to us to be able to enhance security for sensitive data. Okay, Douglas asked, if an agency files as the lead applicant to procure and deploy renewable energy systems on behalf of Justice 40 communities, would each community receiving these systems have to file its own application? So this is a tricky question because of it's talking about procuring the energy rather than building the system under PACE. And then because the question is related to a state agency applying, the state agency would not be a cooperative under New ERA. So
I think you're talking about PACE probably here. So yeah, so I would say two things. For PACE, the applicant should be whoever's going to be building and owning that power and then selling it. So
and owing us the money because
yes, so whoever's going to be
with a
taking out the
partial
loan,
forgiveness, you're going to have a loan attached to that. So that applicant not only has to be the person responsible for the project, but also the person responsible for the debt and being fully capable of paying that debt.
Mm-hmm. But as I understand it, and Chris, you should correct me, a state agency could apply for PACE as the applicant. And if you're going to take out the loan, build and own that energy and then sell it to the Justice 40 communities. So you wouldn't have, each community would only apply if they're planning to build the energy, take out the loan, and then sell that energy to their community. So for PACE, whoever's going to take out the loan, whoever's going to build the energy and resell it, that is the entity who should apply. For New ERA, it's just cooperatives.
But the same, yeah, and it's the cooperative that is the one that's taking out the loan, and that will be doing the portfolio of actions that are covered by New ERA.
And then Jamie Bronga asked, did RUS decide how to handle Alaska tribal lands for Category 3? I don't know that was an outstanding question.
Yeah, so I would say, Jamie, take a look at the map to see if your area that you're particularly concerned about is covered by the map. Alaska is complicated because of Alaska Native Village corporations as well as Alaska Native corporations. So I would say first step is look at the map. If you have a question, let us know. If you believe you're eligible, go ahead and assert it in your LOI. We will validate it. We will check it. If you're not eligible, the worst we can say is, sorry, you're not eligible for that category. I think using the mapping tool should be helpful in that regard.
And Maria asked, the funding announcement says that RUS PACE 23 is the code, but that doesn't work on grants.gov. My understanding is that won't work until Monday when you can submit applications. Tasha, is that correct?
That's accurate. Yep.
Yeah, so it won't work until Monday when you can actually submit applications. Otherwise, we'd have people submitting early. So, but yes, that is the right code. And then will hydrogen blending initiatives be considered under New ERA? If you are blending hydrogen with fossil, then I think the answer is probably no, but I think we'd need to have more information. But New ERA is for zero or, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of different flavors of hydrogen.
Yep.
Because green hydrogen is different than gray hydrogen. And anyway, there's a whole rainbow of hydrogens, but Nicole, we'd like to know more about what you're talking about before we give a final answer to that. But if it's blended with fossil, we made clear in New ERA and PACE well, New ERA in particular, is that because Congress said this is about greatest reduction in greenhouse gases, fossil resources other than carbon capture sequestration, which is listed in the statute, would not be eligible for IRA funding. You could also take a look at the core program for that level, because we do know that there are natural gas projects that will be blending hydrogen in order to comply with EPA regulations, and that may require some retrofitting, and that also may be eligible purpose under our core loan program, which has excellent interest rates with Treasury or Treasury plus an eighth interest.
Mm-hmm.
Amy asks, is the submission of one PDF that includes a PDF of the shapefile? I'm unclear how the shapefile is submitted.
So,
okay.
yeah,
You want to take a shot at that?
Sure. So basically, and Tasha, you should jump in here if I misstate anything. Basically, you'll create your grants.gov, you'll fill out that 424, and then you'll be able to upload your shapefile, you'll be able to upload your PDF of your LOI, you'll be able to upload anything else that you need to upload. So you don't have to create your shapefile and put it in the same PDF as your LOI. You'll be able to attach to that 424 in grants.gov a PDF of the letter of interest, and then you'll also be able to upload the shape files. Tasha, did I get that right?
Yes, you got that right. So specifically to attach it, it's going to be in section 15 on the 424, and you can do as many as attachments as you need.
So hopefully that makes your life easy.
All right, I had to look up on my phone BESS, battery energy
I can
storage
take this one,
system. My grandmother's name was Bessie, so I wanted to make sure that they weren't talking about my grandma here, because if it were my grandma's technology, that would clearly be proven technology. But I will, Claire, I'll defer to you or to one of our engineers.
No, it just depends on what BESS system you're using. Take a look at our definition in the PACE LOI. If you think that your technology, there are flow batteries that we'd probably consider. If you think your technology is commercially available per the PACE definition, then apply and state why you think it's commercially available, and then we can go from there. But there's a lot of different technologies out there, obviously. So just look at that definition. If you think you meet the requirement, you should submit. And then, if we need additional information, we can ask for it. Ken or others, anybody else want to add to that?
No, it just has to be commercially available.
Yeah.
Technology that's approved for us to finance.
Yeah.
And we'll look at deployments outside the United States as well. But and we know that battery storage is very dynamic area of science and technology right now, and so we know it's fast developing. The next question here from Lucas, I think I'm going to ask us to be reserved on this one, and so we can
let's take a look at those.
These are about the achievable reduction tool relating to New ERA. There have been some updates in the achievable reduction tool, but we will take those comments back and double check them against our work. And if there is a need to make a change, we will alert on our website that we have done so.
And then Uma asked a really great question, or Ume, apologies if I pronounced your name wrong. In a consolidated LOI, are projects still looked at individually or as a whole portfolio of projects? If one project does not qualify for the loan, but the others do, would only the single project get kicked out, or would the whole portfolio get kicked out? I think that we've been talking about it as, you wouldn't have the whole portfolio get kicked out. We would look at each project and make sure it's viable.
Yeah,
and it also kind of depends on how your LOI is being consolidated. Is it multiple people applying? And
exactly, it will be fact and circumstance driven. So just a word of warning, nobody should construct in either case for PACE or New ERA an LOI with phantom partners in order to either lock in a place in the queue or generate a good score and then say, oh, when it comes time to apply. Because if it looks it was not a genuine coalition LOI, then that could knock you out. There could be, if you could have imagine a joint project where, let's say you have joint ownership of a single asset, and if one of the co-owners falls out and there's not a replacement, that the entire project may suffer from financial feasibility. But, we want good faith efforts, good faith coalitions here. That is the point of the disaggregation model, is that once we move to disaggregation, then each one of the individual coalition members will be considered on their own merit. And it is one of the risks that we're willing to take, that if one of the projects does fall out, that will not necessarily take down the other projects, unless, of course, we see some unsavory behavior that got you to the point with let's say, a phantom co-applicant.
And then, let's see. Hello asks, if the applicant is a solar developer, not a utility or cooperative developing a community solar project, how would the solar developer determine the target service area of the project? Subscribers could be any customer of the local utility, whether it is 50% or more rural. So
what is the community being served, right?
Yeah, I think you just need to, tell us who is being served by that energy.
Again, if the energy is just being put on the grid for anybody's benefit, well, that's a different story. If the energy is for if it is a community solar project and it has a distinct community and it has a distinct set of customers, that would be where we would go in terms of eligibility. We would also probably have to go a few more steps in terms of financial feasibility and loan security on community solar if we didn't have a clear PPA that would establish a fixed price, fixed term, to which we can make an underwriting judgment. So there may be additional credit support required for a situation like that.
Owen asks, can we confirm that if a project qualifies with section C3B, this project would not qualify unless it also meets the criteria of section C3A? So I'll look that up real quick in the NOFO while you answer the next question from
Thank
James.
you. Yes, because that one would have stumped me because I would have had to do the same thing. Next question here from James. Following on from last question, if DG, distributed generation projects, are eligible, could half of the sites included in the request for funding not be located in rural areas? Also, what level environmental review would be necessary if renewable energy resources are installed on existing builds? Okay, so the rule is for PACE eligibility, you have to have at least 50% rural. So if you have 50% non-rural, you're not at least 50%. You need to have at least 50. So you need 50% plus one to be 50-50 rural or 50 plus one rural. So, and then, every project that involves construction does have a level environmental review. I will say that as a general rule, this is not a promise or a guarantee, but as a general view, if you are putting solar panels on an existing facility or existing building, the environmental review is probably less of a headache. That's not the right word for it, but it's probably an easier task than it would be if you were to go into greenfield areas. It's not to say that there aren't environmental issues related to deployment on buildings or existing disturbed sites, but disturbed sites have attributes that could make the environmental review a little bit more expeditious. But you bring up a good point, is that everybody needs to be able to include in their planning horizon of execution the time it would take to do an environmental review. And that environmental review is driven by 7 CFR 1970, which is the rural development 1RD environmental review. And there are elements in there that are kind of relevant to rural development and may not be in other agencies. So you can't just assume that an environmental review in another agency gives you a free pass through our process. So make sure that that's part of your planning horizon. Vishnavi asks a question, should we be looking at our city-town population when determining reality or the utility service area in which the project is located? Okay, so this is another one where what's relevant is who is benefiting from the power, not so much as the location of the project itself. So if your city town is the off-taker, let's say you have a municipal utility that is buying the power from your project under a PPA, we would look at the rural, non-rural composition of that city town that you would mention. So it's who is benefiting from the power, not necessarily where the power generating facility is located.
And just real quick, Owen, the answer to your question is yes. Section C3A is eligible service area and C3B is eligible project. So yes, you have to meet the qualifications of C3A before, and then as long as you're qualified there, then you can move on to C3B and make sure you've got a qualified project.
Okay. Now, John Michael asks, I'd like to return to John Buffington's question about the RUS mapping tool. The NOFO asks for a shapefile that shows service territory and project location, but the RUS tool does not allow for labeling or any other way to differentiate between service territory and project location. So is the project location shapefile requirement being dropped? We want to know the location of the project location. So we do need the shapefile for the certainly for the service territory. I'm assuming that your project will be a point on the map rather than, I mean, it would have to be a pretty darn big project to represent itself, you know, in a large geographic category. So you could certainly have multiple. So you could just explain to us, or if you want to have the shapefile for the service territory and points on the map as to where the project location is, you could upload those two different attachments. I don't think that would be a problem.
Yeah. You can definitely just do them as 2 attachments.
Tell us the location. You know, give us a precise location, an address or a lat long or something that would say this is where the project would be located.
Yeah, but we definitely do still need the project location as well. So you can, as Chris said, either do it 2 shaped files with one just a point on the map and described as such as the location, project location, and the other as the service area, or just a dot on the map of the service area if it is in the service area. Okay, Trudy just wants to confirm standalone battery energy storage is only available for PACE program funding if it is accompanied by another solar or wind project. It cannot be standalone storage. So it has to be in support of renewables. So you have to show that it could be a standalone energy storage system if it's clearly supporting renewables. If that energy that is being stored then is from renewables. So that's the thing. If maybe there's an existing plant that, you know, it doesn't have to be solar or wind, it can be any of the renewable energies that are eligible under PACE. But yes, if you have like a solar facility and you want to add battery storage to it, that is eligible for the battery storage, as long as it's in support of renewables. So you don't have to also be building generation.
Right, and it has to be 100% renewable. So just let's make clear of what's not eligible. If I'm going to do a standalone storage proposal and I'm just going to store grid power, no, that won't work. If I'm going to do a standalone storage system that is attached to an existing renewable resource, again, wind, solar, hydropower, geothermal, whatever, you know, whether those enumerated technologies, well, then that would be okay. And so would, I'm going to do a renewable, you know, I'm going to do a wind farm plus storage, or I'm going to do hydro plus storage. That would be okay. Storage in support of hydro, storage in support of wind, etc. That's okay, but just storage in itself to store general grid power, that's not going to cut it.
Yeah. Mark asked a good question about ETH authentication. In addition to SAM.gov required to submit an LOI for PACE and New Era. So my understanding, and Tasha, you should correct me if I'm wrong, is that you will not be asked for your e-authentication ID as part of applying through grants.gov, but you will need it if you proceed to the second stage for an application. So that is still a requirement. We want you to be prepared for us, hopefully, then asking you to submit a full application. And that will be required for New Era for both the LOI stage and for the application stage. So please still proceed in getting your e-authentication ID, but for the PACE LOI, you probably will not have to input that ID anywhere. Tasha, is that correct?
Yes, that is accurate. It is not required. The eAuth ID is not required for submitting on grants.gov.
Yeah. But the requirement still exists so that we can, you won't need it for the LOI, but you will need it for the application. So please continue to proceed and get it.
Well, Hans has a very good question. That is, again, another one that we may have to defer, but what is the partial loan forgiveness taxable? And
if the project
consult your tax advisor, because if we could, we're not authorized to be able to convey whether it's taxable or not. A lot of that will depend on whether you are a taxable entity or not. So again, consult the Department of Treasury, the IRS, and your tax advisor as to whether the forgivable portion of a as a PACE loan is itself taxable.
And then Jake, this is great. On the 40% loan forgiveness, the PACE website states if the project is in or serves. It should really only state if it serves. So the funding announcement is where you should go. That's the Bible in terms of where that's the final word on things, is the funding announcement. So this is a great flag for us that we have that as a typo on our webpage. So we will fix that and make sure that it's clear that if it serves is the 40% loan forgiveness. So if there's ever any discrepancy between what's on our webpage and what's in the funding announcement, the funding announcement is what holds. So moving on to Misna's question, for a community solar project in the PACE LOI, should we submit a shapefile for the service area of the entire interconnected utility? So your shapefile should reflect who your energy is going to be serving, is the answer.
Right. So if your addressable market is that entire utility, I think that probably would be who your service area is. If your service area is limited to a specific, let's say, rural community, then that would be your service area. And again, for community solar, remember, we do have to be able to have adequate security and financial feasibility to proceed.
Yes.
Lucas says, looking ahead, the required documentation for full New Era application will be challenging within the 60-day turnaround period. Does everything need to be included in the initial application, or will there be a period of back and forth communication to provide additional documentation, NEPA review engineering report, EPC contract interconnection agreement, et cetera? Well, I'll take a stab at that one. Very good question, Lucas. So we know that there are some projects out there that are chomping at the bit, ready to go. They will be able to likely meet the 60-day turnaround. We were very clear in the funding notice and supporting documentation, be able to say it's 60 days or a date that is agreeable to the LOI submitter and the agency. We know, particularly if you're new to the RUS program, there may be some special considerations, or particularly if you're maybe an under-resourced entity, you may need additional help. So we're going to try to be very very accommodating, but at the same time, we are under an extraordinarily tight time frame in the context of utility scale renewable power. Between now and 2031 is a blink of an eye, and so it's not going to be kind of like unlimited grace, but we do understand that there are special situations. You do need to ask, though. If you don't ask for an alternate date, you will be locked in at the 60 days, and then the clock will start ticking. So please, if you need more time and you are lucky enough to pass the LOI hurdle, please let us know, and we will work with you to try to figure this out.
But Chris, let me just answer this, that we understand from a technical point of view, there are going to be a lot of contracts and agreements such as the EPC contract interconnections that may not be yet executed or may not even be in draft form. So we expect that may occur. But if you have them in draft form at the application phase, that's fine. If you have a status of what they are, that's fine. But once we get the application, we will be working with the applicants to ask for more information or more updates to what you previously provided in the application phase. We will be working with applicants during the due diligence of the technical review phase after the application is received.
Thank you, Ken. And Chris, we usually only do an hour and a half, but I'm okay to go till 4 Eastern time if you are. And I know this is kind of right before the application. So I'm happy to keep going till 4 if you are okay.
Well, Claire, I'll roll with you. Let's do it.
Okay, we're going to try to answer as many of these as possible before 4, if not all of them. Well, we're going to try to answer all of them. So Yassine, I still think that there's some confusion around this. You're asking about, can you elaborate on an off-taker benefit? How do I explain this since my off-taker is a utility with a PPA rather than energy being used? So this is one thing about the PACE program, is that you do have to be able to show who your off-taker is. And we do need to make sure that that off-taker has a service area that is at least 50% rural, and then depending on what other level of forgiveness you're looking for. So,
or the off-taker is purchasing it for a identifiable rural community, because we know that some utilities are very large. And if they're going to buy it, if they're buying the power from you to serve their rural customers, that's how we establish who the beneficiaries are. That's one of the key functions of a PPA.
Yeah, and this program was created to benefit rural America. So we want to make sure that this is energy that is going to rural America and that there are customer benefits to that. Lisa asked about Davis-Bacon and tribal communities. Is there an equivalency or other tools? I think that we may have to get back to you on that. Where is the variance of governance exists versus standard rural utilities? Unless, Chris, you have an answer to the Davis-Bacon.
No, I think we will need to defer to our colleagues in tribal relations.
Yeah, Jamie, could you take lead on reaching out to our tribal relations folks on that one? And then Lisa, we'll do a Q&A on it. Douglas asks again, if a municipality purchases distributed renewable energy for purposes of community EV charging and backup battery storage for community use in grid outages, can the municipality provide this service for free, or does there need to be a charge and dedicated revenue stream? So first, I would just make sure that if you're the municipality applying, then you're planning to build and own that system.
Yeah, but here the question is the municipality purchases. So, I mean, presumably Douglas is asking about a developer who would sell their power to the municipality.
Well, I would say that I guess that you're theorizing the developer's building, say, a solar plant, and they're going to sell it to the municipality. That municipality is going to direct it towards those EV charges. As long as the PPA is as long as they pay the loan, the charges for the power they received under the PPA, that's all that
Yeah,
matters.
somebody, right.
Yeah,
Somebody
so-
has
You
to
know?
pay for that power because obviously you wouldn't have a financial feasibility if the
Yeah,
power is given away free. But if you are a developer and you're selling the power to a community, and that community, you're selling it to, let's say, to a municipal, a municipality for the benefit of its citizens, we would look at the population of that municipality to be able to determine its rurality. Now, how the is the power purchase agreement bankable? Does the municipality have the wherewithal to be able to make those payments, given that they're not going to charge anybody for those services? You know, that I think is kind of an open question.
Yeah, Douglas, I think you just have to show us that you can repay the loan. Whoever's applying for the loan just has to show us how they plan to repay the loan, and that has to be credible. So
But to be PACE, you have to have,
yeah.
it has to be a renewable resource or storage in support of a renewable resource. So, you know, to make sure that that renewable power is what is being sold to a bankable counterparty under a bankable PPA.
Yeah, but again, if that municipality wants to provide that service for free, I don't think that is okay with us, as long as you can show how the loan will be paid back and why there's a credible way to pay back the loan. We have another question. To summarize, we have to make 2 submissions: draw the service area in the mapping tool for each project, upload shapefile of the project location for each project.
So definitely yes for number 1. And number 2, you can describe to us with specificity where the location is, or if you would like to put a point on the map, upload, you could do number 2. But definitely we need to have a shapefile for the service area so we could determine A, your rural eligibility, and B, your discount eligibility for PACE.
Okay. And Matt asks, can we front load include O&M costs for our estimated total capital?
Let me turn to Mr. Solano for that, but I
I-
think that's going to be a quick
so
question.
I would think O&M costs are expense, so you would probably need to show that in your long-range financial forecast, the expenses that you're incurring for those O&M costs. I don't recall seeing any O&M costs being capitalized.
Right. We are interested in financing under PACE, assuming this is a PACE-related question. And again, largely true for New Era, is like we're interested in financing new renewable assets. So we're investing in infrastructure, so
Yeah.
we want to make sure that typically we would not be financing the operation costs. We would actually expect to have reserves for your operation and maintenance in some cases.
Yeah, those are future costs that we would not pay for as a capitalized expense. Capitalized.
Now, there are some expenses that are recoverable, but yeah, again, typically we are focused like a laser beam on infrastructure investment. All right, Hillel says for a PACE loan. Oh, go ahead.
No, you go.
Okay. For a PACE loan application, does an agreement already need to be in place to demonstrate that more than 50% of the beneficiaries of the project is in a rural area? Or is commitment to the aforementioned sufficient? So again, we don't expect you at the LOI stage to have everything 100% locked down, but we needed to know that it's serious and real. So I think that, you know, that you have a commitment to get an LOI, to get a PPA once you have, once you have your project up and running, or you have certainty about the construction of the project, we would need the finalized PPA. But the LOI stage just needs your realistic estimate of what that will be.
Great. And then for the next question, we've got if an entity applying for loan refinancing on a stranded asset under New ERA has sold the asset and not retired the asset, does the change the entities that change the entity's eligibility for loan refinance, grant and low interest loans? And the answer is yes. So we're not talking about selling assets. We're talking about a stranded asset that has been retired or is planned to be retired.
That's correct. Same thing. If you sold the asset at a loss, you sold the asset at a loss. And you may have debt associated with that asset, but you sold it. You didn't retire it. So stranded assets, for us, one, it has to be related to a decarbonization effort or a greenhouse gas reduction effort. And there has to be debt associated with it. And it is attached to the retirement of that carbon intensive or greenhouse gas intensive asset. So not just any stranded investment, and not something that you sold and took a loss on because the asset didn't get retired. It's still in production out there.
Mm-hmm. And then Lee Shu asks, how about the projects under our community solar programs if there's no PPA, only subscriptions? So we tried to be careful in writing the funding announcement for PACE that while a PPA is great and most welcome, there could be other ways that you can show who is buying the energy and what the financial arrangements are. So as long as, again, you can show us that it's a financially feasible project, that we can have good confidence that you can pay back the loan, that it's clear who is going to be the user of that energy, that you're creating the energy, that's what we're looking for.
Can I take the next one?
Yeah, go for it, Ken.
Yeah, this one is, for example, if you're a distribution cooperative that's going to own say a solar facility, and your consumers are going to benefit in consuming that power, no PPA would be required. That would be an example of that. PPAs are not required only if you're going to be selling and exporting the power from a facility that you're going to finance to another entity whose off-takers will be consuming it. If you are the entity with the consumers, then no PPA would be required.
Very good. Exactly right. So you can be qualified for PACE financing if you are an existing utility, and you got an eligible community, and you're building the project for the benefit of your customers, and those customers are rural. You have an obligation to serve those customers. You don't need a PPA in order to establish both the financial obligation of your customers to pay their bills, as well as the creditworthiness of the project because you are the operating utility. And a kind of a similar analysis would be applied to some of these community solar questions. Is the community solar provider akin to an operating utility? Whereas, again, when we have an operating utility, we have a bunch of assets available, and we'll have to look at the assets available that the community solar entity needs.
So James asked a good practical question. He heard you say PDF for the shape files. So just to be really clear, you use the mapping tool, and then you create your zip file, your shape files, and you zip those up, and that's what you'll upload to the grants.gov. So it doesn't have to be in PDF. It shouldn't be in PDF. It should.
I mean, the point I was trying to make is
that's
you don't
fine.
just draw it on the tool and then think that we've got it. It's you have to download it, and then you have to upload it into grants.gov.
Yeah, so
that was the point I was trying to make. I apologize for speaking hastily, but thank you, James, for clarifying.
Yeah, so you're absolutely correct. The shape files needs to be in a zip folder with shape files inside. And then you'll upload your PDF of the letter of interest. So that will be a PDF, and then any other documents as PDFs. Okay, PACE question, LOI. If it is a consolidated LOI, do we submit one SF424 or multiple SF424s?
So if you reflect on that graphic, and I don't know, Tasha, if we can call up that graphic, there will be in your coalition and your consolidated PDF LOI, one lead entity. That lead entity will be the one that is going to be entering the information. And so you'll have one, but they're going to be doing it on behalf of their coalition partner. So we'll need to be able to show that there's an agency relationship between the lead and the partners. But yes, we're not expecting, that's the whole point of the joint LOI, is to be able to have one LOI in both, either category, PACE or a New ERA, for that group of coalition partners. Once we cross over the LOI threshold and you're fortunate enough to be invited to apply, then you will disaggregate. So the plan is to go with one single filing.
May I expand?
Yeah, go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, just now, the person, the entity that fills out the SF424 is referred to as the LOI submitter. When you upload the PDF file, that will provide a more detailed description of the other applicants that are involved in the consolidated LOI. That'll provide the information for those other entities.
All right, very good. Let's see, James asking for
solar
PACE.
and for PACE.
Yes, for solar and storage, DG projects installed on existing buildings, i.e. multifamily housing, can all be distributed sites, fall under one project, and what level of environmental review is needed given these projects are installed on existing buildings? Okay, so let me answer. I'll take the stab on the second part of the question, and Claire, I'll let you take a stab at the first part, because mine is, it depends, right? In general, again, it's a less of a lift for environmental review to deploy on an existing structure, but it depends on what that existing structure is. Is it his historical significance? Are you going to be deploying on on top of a building that is somehow under the Historic Preservation Act? I mean, it's going to depend on exactly what you want to do, but as a general statement, deploying upon existing structures can often be a faster track to NEPA, but we've got NEPA, endangered species, and historic preservation review, as well as reviews by where relevant tribal historic preservation officers.
Mm-hmm. And James, it could all be under one project if that's the best way for you to design the project. I think that's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, just has to be otherwise complying with the rest of everything we've been saying about eligible, feasible, securable, and executable.
Okay, Tisha asks, our GIS personnel are asking, how will the accuracy of the shapefiles be verified since the RUS tool requires basically hand-drawn complex boundaries? Or is there a method of importing or drawing these boundaries that we'll need to reference? So basically, we've got the one tool that we're using for everybody. And then, you draw it on there. And then, we have our team that's going to be verifying using those maps. So again, the idea of having one system and one mapping system is so that everybody gets treated the same and that we have the same data that's underlying those maps.
And we will be doing the best we can with the tools that we've got. And I will just say, we will, we may have some dialogue related to what the map shows. It's going to only be in close situations where the map's going to be determinative of someone's eligibility, and the likelihood of a project passing or failing because there is one too many non-rural customers, that could be tricky. I don't think there's a high likelihood of that occurring. Where there will be some discussion is the distinction between a 40% or 60% or 20% and 40% level of forgiveness. And so we will, if we have questions, we can ask. But I think Tasha might have had a comment in there as well.
Yeah, I was just going to say to everyone, just as a note, if you look at the actual webinar chat, we have an email address, rd.innovation.data@usda.gov. So if you have questions related to submitting shapefiles, you are welcome to reach out to that email address, and we have real development staff that will help.
But my advice just is do the best that you can to be as accurate as you can. If there is some anomaly in the way the shapefile comes out, let us know so we can take that into account.
Mm-hmm. Alexander asks, is the shapefile necessary for a PACE project that is behind the meter for distributed generation? It's a single point of consumption by an off-taker, so a map pin drop should suffice. Here, we do need the shapefile because that's what helps us to determine forgivability and what those entities, the character of those entities. So anyway, this may be a more complex question if you have disparate entities that are going to be.
And the behind the meter raises the question of whether is it for resale. So I think PACE, again, PACE, you have to have a renewable resource that is for resale. So if you're deploying behind the meter renewable resources that the consumer owns, that's not for resale, the consumer is owning. So I think, Alexander, we'd probably need to know more about your specific project and context of your question.
And then the next question is, what type of certification is needed to show prevailing wages?
So, first of all, I mean, you will tell us. Your certification is that we have looked at the Department of Labor website and determined the prevailing wages are this level, and we meet that requirement. And we will, over time, be looking at that in terms of compliance. So, I mean, the certification is the applicant certifying to us that they do meet the requirements outlined by the Department of Labor. There is also a process where if you do not have prevailing wages in your area or in your line of business, there is a procedure where the Department of Labor can come up with a prevailing wage for that, that area.
And then Ellen basically asked this question about virtual power plants, which we've gotten before. Again, Ellen, the main thing is that you do have to show us who that power is serving. So if your model does not, then it doesn't meet the requirements of the program. We do need to be able to know who you're serving. And the program doesn't just support merchant power. So under what you've described here is that you've got basically a merchant price plus a BPPA price. So
right. And
again, you have to be able to show us that it is meeting the rural eligibility requirement.
And again, if this is for PACE, you still have to build the renewable resource. So a virtual power plant assumes that you're saving power, you're not generating power. So I think again, for PACE, you have to make sure that you meet the statutory requirements. James asks, can a battery be attached to future renewables, or does it have to be existing? Well, sure, if the future renewables and the future battery are going to be deployed together, but you're not going to get financing until that battery is attached to those future renewables, because we won't be able to finance the battery just in the hope that a renewable will show up, and there'll be no revenues attached to that battery. So we also have a difficult time of showing financial feasibility. But certainly if, let's say, a renewable project is going to be deployed on a date certain or within our time frame, and you want to invest in the battery storage to support that future project, assuming both of those occur, then you could be, that could be eligible. But the battery storage that we will finance and the battery use that we will finance has to be for 100% renewable.
Mhm. So Thomas asked a good question. If you're a municipality and you're providing power to your own customers, do you need to enter into a PPA with yourself or can you just explain?
Okay, so I just want to make an assumption in Thomas's question is that the municipality is a municipal electric utility. If the municipality is a municipal electric utility, no, you don't need a PPA, just like the co-op example that Jessica asked. You don't need a PPA to be able to sell power to your own customers, provided your own customers are eligible.
So it is 4 o'clock and we really do have to close now. But I think that hopefully we answered. Jonathan just asked a question about, can we use our own shape files? We are asking everybody to use our mapping system to create the shape files. So, you know, I don't think that we're, you know, we could discuss whether there's any flexibility around that. But again, the goal is for everybody to use the same mapping so that we've got clarity on the data underlying that, et cetera.
Yeah, and stand by for the application guide for
Yeah.
that should be, we hope to be available fairly soon.
Yeah, and Wanda, just so you know, the community energy co-op in Puerto Rico, it has to be a cooperative organized under the IRS specific definition. So PACE would probably be the better program for you since you're not going to be New Era eligible.
The key sections for New Era is section 501C12 or 1381A2 of the Internal Revenue Code. If you are a cooperative under those criteria, then you could be in the arena for New Era. But if you're not, if you're a cooperative and you're operating not under those two codes, then your probably best bet is PACE.
Yeah, and Wanda, our understanding is in Puerto Rico, there's only one that is incorporated under that code. So I think PACE is probably your best bet. Okay, so we should go, but thank you guys.
Thank you, everybody.
Please feel free to send emails and questions to our inbox. Tasha posted that in the chat. Thank you guys again. We really look forward to seeing what you submit. We're getting really excited.
And as you get, you know, please, you know, we've tried to provide this guidance over the course of these weeks to be able to help you be successful. Do the best that you can, and good luck. The curtain comes up 11:59 Monday morning, and let's see what happens. So anyway, good luck, everybody. And again, remember the #1 rule: you can't win if you don't enter. All right, talk to y'all later. Take care. Thank you, Claire. Thank you, team.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, team.
Thank you, audience. Bye-bye.